I live in the Pacific Northwest, a quiet stretch of Washington. A couple of years ago, I worked the closing shift at a small roadside diner that sat right next to the highway. I was 29 back then. The place stayed open until 2 a.m., which seemed late, considering how empty the area usually was. Still, truckers and highway travelers occasionally wandered in for a quick bite. I grew up in the South before moving out here. People back home love small talk. Strangers become friends over coffee. But up here, people tend to keep to themselves. They're polite, but distant. The air feels colder, more reserved. That night was like most others. It was just me and the cook working. He stayed back in the kitchen while I handled the front. It was close to 2 a.m., and the place was almost clean. Then we were both ready to lock up. Then the bell above the door chimed. A heavy-set man walked in, alone. He wore jeans pulled too high, a tucked-in gray shirt, a brown jacket, and glasses. He had one of those thick mustaches you rarely see anymore. His smile was wide and constant, almost like he'd practiced it in a mirror. I greeted him and asked if he wanted to sit at the bar or a table. He picked a table. I handed him a menu and told him gently that the kitchen was closing in 10 minutes. He nodded and said he'd just like a black coffee and some French toast. He introduced himself and said his name was Nolan. The order was simple, and the chef still had the grill going, so it wasn't a big deal. When I told the cook the order, he just sighed and gave me a look. I shrugged. We'd both been there too long to argue. When I returned to the dining area, Nolan waved me over. He was eager to talk, more than most people around here. He asked where I was from and mentioned the potholes on the roads nearby. I kept my answers vague, just casual replies, but he kept pressing for details, especially about where I lived. That was unusual. I told him a general area, nothing specific. I never tell strangers where I live, especially at 2 a.m. He mentioned he'd just moved into town. His voice was friendly, but something about his tone didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was how he stared, like he was trying to memorize my face. When the chef brought the food out, I handed it to Nolan and went back to wiping down counters. I didn't want to talk anymore. I was drained, ready to go home. Once he finished eating, I dropped the check off early, silently hoping he'd get the hint that we were closing. He paid by card, still smiling, then he walked out. After cleaning his table, I grabbed my things, said goodnight to the cook, and stepped outside into the cold. There were 3 cars in the lot, mine, the cook's, and a third I hadn't seen before. It was an older silver sedan, something like a 2005 Toyota or maybe an Audi, hard to tell in the dark. I couldn't see inside either. The windows were tinted, or it was just too dim out there. Maybe it was Nolan's car. I got into my vehicle and started the 20-minute drive home. Headlights cutting through the mist. A few minutes into the highway drive, a chime sounded from my dashboard. My tire pressure alert lit up. The back right tire was dropping fast. I had no idea how to change a tire, and I'd never even called roadside assistance before. The number on the screen kept dropping. 20, 10, 5. The steering wheel began to shake. Then the entire car shook. I had no choice. I pulled over. When I stepped out to check, the tire was completely flat. Then, headlights. They flicked on suddenly and lit up the trees around me. A car approached slowly, and my stomach turned. I scrambled back into my car, locked the doors, and just sat there, frozen. The car that pulled up stopped behind me. There was a knock at my window. I looked up. It was Nolan. He smiled again, but now he was wearing gloves. He waved like this was just some lucky coincidence. He leaned close and said, "Kathy, is that you? Are you all right?" For the sake of privacy, let's just say that's my name. I cracked the window slightly, just enough to speak. He asked if I needed help. I told him I had a flat. He leaned in, asking which tire it was. I pointed to the back passenger side. He nodded and walked around the car. I quickly dialed 911, holding the phone low in my lap. The operator answered. I spoke quietly, trying not to alert Nolan, but giving enough information for her to understand something wasn't right.
When he returned to my side, he said he could fix the tire and asked me to get out of the car. I shook my head and said, "Thanks, but my boyfriend is on his way to help." His face shifted. The smile faded. His eyes narrowed just slightly. Then, without a word, he stepped back from the car. I took that moment to whisper into the phone that this man had probably slashed my tire and was trying to get me out of the car. I gave the operator the name of the road I was on. Then a loud sound. Glass shattered next to me. The passenger side window exploded. Tiny shards landed all over my lap. I screamed, loud and desperate. I shouted, "I'm on the phone with the police," and held up my screen to show him. His hand reached into the car. I panicked, thinking he might grab me, but instead he snatched the phone and hurled it into the dark. Then he ran, jumped into his car, tires screeched as he sped off, vanishing into the night. I sat there shaking, unable to move, and the only light came from my dashboard. I had no flashlight, no backup plan. I wasn't going out there to look for the phone. I stayed put, locked in, and prayed. Then I heard it, sirens getting closer. Relief hit me so hard I cried. I got out of the car and waved until I saw flashing lights turn off the highway towards me. One police car, then another, and then a third. They listened carefully, asked me everything. I told them about Noman, described his car, pointed the direction he had gone, and one officer drove off to search, while the others stayed. They even found my phone, but it was completely smashed. They were kind, more than I expected, and one of them changed my tire. Another gave me an escort home. Later that week, an officer called to say the investigation was still open. They reviewed the diner's surveillance footage. They had his image, but I never heard if they caught him. I never went back to that job, and I never saw Nolan again.
Back in 2019, I started working at a Domino's. It was my very first shift, and I took the job mainly to help pay for school stuff and dorm supplies. Since I was new, the manager came along on my first few deliveries to show me how everything worked and to see how I handled things. That night, around 8 p.m., we got an order. The store didn't have fancy GPS screens like today, so we had to look up directions on our phones. The order was for 4 large pizzas and 2 bottles of Pib. We loaded everything into my car since I was the one being trained. Along with me, with a manager and another trainee I hadn't met before. The address was far out in a part of town that felt completely isolated. It took us 15 to 20 minutes to get there. The house looked super old, like it had been left behind by time. The paint was peeling, some windows had boards on them, and the whole place felt off. I asked the manager if we really had to go up to the door. He said yes, and that he'd walk up with us to deliver the food. Reluctantly, we all stepped out. I noticed the other trainee seemed just as nervous as I was. As we walked toward the front door, he suddenly pointed to an upstairs window and said he thought someone was watching us. The manager brushed it off, told him not to worry, and reminded us to be polite. I pressed the doorbell, but it didn't work, so the manager knocked loudly. No answer. We waited, then knocked again. Still nothing. There was a strange smell in the air, kind of rotten, but we couldn't tell if it was coming from inside the house or just the outside. Finally, after a minute, the door creaked open just barely. A man, maybe in his 50s, peeked through and asked who we were. Then the manager told him we had his pizza. Suddenly, the man opened the door fully and started acting overly friendly. He said he had trouble moving around and that's why it took a while to answer. Our manager gave him the receipt and asked if he'd be paying with cash or a check. The man said he'd go grab the money. He walked back inside, leaving the front door open. That's when I looked in. The inside of the house was completely empty. No chairs, no tables, nothing, just a couple of old blankets on the floor. It looked like no one was really living there properly. Then we heard footsteps, upstairs, more than one set. It was clear someone else was inside. That's when things started to feel really wrong. The new guy's earlier comment about someone watching us suddenly didn't seem so crazy. Our manager called out asking if the man had the money yet. No answer. The footsteps stopped, and everything became silent. All we could hear was our breathing. The manager told us to wait at the door while he walked around the house to check if the man needed help or something. We agreed, and he headed off. Then footsteps again. But this time they were coming from under the house, like from a basement or crawlspace. We looked at each other, both confused and honestly freaked out. Suddenly we heard our manager scream. Seconds later, he came running back to the front and shouted for us to get in the car. We didn't ask questions. I jumped in and drove as fast as I could. On the way back, he told us what happened. Behind the house, in a shadowy area, he had seen a group of people gathered around what looked like a small campfire. In the middle of the group was a baby deer, and they were all sitting there laughing and acting strange like it was some kind of twisted game. That's when he knew we had to leave. Both the new guy and I quit the next day. I later found out the manager left the job about a month after that night. None of us ever went back, and it felt like we had stumbled into something secret, something we were never supposed to see. And honestly, I'm just thankful we left when we did. When I was younger, before we moved to Texas, my family lived in Georgia in a house with one of the biggest backyards I'd ever seen. Seriously, it felt like a personal park. I always felt like the favorite kid in the neighborhood, especially when it came to outdoor games. Everyone wanted to come over. We had a yard that stretched across 2 acres, bordered by woods on 3 sides, filled with tall trees, a big trampoline in one corner, a large hot tub, a separate 3-car garage, and even an above-ground pool. For a regular middle-class neighborhood, we were lucky. We had it all. There was so much space that we could play anything: soccer, baseball, football, you name it. Sometimes we even played games like hide and seek or manhunt, which was our favorite. One Friday night, when we were in 6th grade, a few of my closest friends and I, Mike, Michael, and Jason, decided we were going to camp out in the backyard. We were about 11 or 12 years old. Of course, we had to check with our parents first, but since it was the weekend and we weren't causing trouble, all of them agreed. My family had plenty of camping gear too, including 2 tents, which made things easier. By 5 p.m., my friends arrived. We kicked off the evening with some sports, soccer, then a bit of baseball. After burning off our energy, we took a break, and soon after, my parents brought out pizza. We probably ate around 6:30 or 7, and by then the sky was starting to turn orange. Time to set up the tents before it got too dark. Since I had some Boy Scout experience, I was the main one setting up the tents, while my friends helped a little. We got everything up just as night settled in. The yard lights turned on, lighting up the space with a soft glow. Perfect timing to start a game of manhunt. Mike and I teamed up to hide, while Michael and Jason were the seekers. Our home base was the back door to the house, but no one was allowed to hang around it during the game. I crawled under the trampoline, which was way in the back corner, close to the woods. That was my hiding spot. Then the seekers blew the whistle, the signal that they were starting. I laid flat under the trampoline, watching them from a distance. I waited for the right moment to make a move. I spotted the hot tub near the house and figured if I could sneak behind it, I'd have a straight shot to the back door. When I noticed Michael and Jason looking away, I made a dash for it. I got behind the hot tub, ducked down, and just then I heard something. A loud noise near the trash bins on the side of the house. One of them almost tipped over, and the motion-activated light on that side flicked on. That light shouldn't have gone off unless someone was over there. I peeked around the corner and caught a glimpse of someone. A tall person in dark clothes quickly walking toward the woods. It definitely wasn't my dad. My heart raced. I ran straight to my friends and told them to end the game. Then I found my dad and explained what I saw. He came out with a flashlight and searched the woods with me for a few minutes. We also checked the street for strange cars, but found nothing. He decided we should probably sleep inside that night. That was disappointing, of course. We had been looking forward to camping out all week. So we went inside and played video games instead.
While playing, I kept explaining to my friends what I had seen. Just a tall figure walking away after knocking over a trash bin, headed straight for the woods. It creeped me out, but we started wondering, what were the chances that person was still out there hours later? Eventually, we made a group decision. We'd go back outside and sleep in the tents. They were already set up, and besides, it was probably nothing, right? We didn't tell my dad, not because we were trying to be sneaky, but just to avoid making a big deal out of it. We quietly grabbed our sleeping bags and headed back outside. Mike and I shared one tent, and Michael and Jason were in the other. We stayed up for a while, joking around and whispering back and forth between tents. Eventually, the laughter faded, and we started to settle down. I wasn't asleep yet when I heard it. Footsteps in the grass, slowly getting closer. Then the zipper on our tent began to open. At first, I thought it was my dad checking on us. I looked up and saw a man's face poking into the tent. He asked, "What are you doing out here?" I started to respond with something like, "They just wanted to sleep outside." But something didn't feel right. As I stared longer, I realized this wasn't my dad. It was someone else, someone older with similar features, but definitely not him. Before I could say anything else, the man started moving, as if he was about to come into the tent. That's when I screamed loudly, like full-on panic scream. Mike woke up instantly and started yelling too. The man grabbed our ankles and told us to be quiet, but when he realized he was about to get caught, he gave up and ran off into the dark. We sprinted out of the tent, shouting for the others and heading straight for the house. My dad was already opening the back door after hearing the noise. I told him that the same man from earlier had come back. My dad immediately ran around the yard shouting, trying to scare him off. He was furious, yelling at whoever it was to show themselves. My mom called the police right away. When they arrived, I gave them a full description of everything that happened. They wrote up a report, and that was about it. Nothing more came of it. At least not that I ever heard. We never found out who that guy was, whether he came back again or if he ever tried anything like that somewhere else. But that night stuck with me. It could have gone much worse, and I still think about it from time to time.
It happened a few years ago, back when I was in middle school. It was 2019, and I was spending the night at a friend's house. Let's call her M. I had been looking forward to that sleepover for weeks. Middle school drama, gossip, and late-night games, the usual stuff. M's house was cool, but a bit eerie. It was located deep in the woods, far from town. No matter where you looked, it was just trees and shadows. The nearest neighbor, about half a mile away, and behind her house, a cliff that dropped straight into the ocean. That night started out great. Our other friend, Sam, was there too. We played truth or dare, hide and seek in the dark, and made snacks in the kitchen while laughing about school stuff. The night was perfect until we decided to take a walk. We asked M's mom if it was okay, and she gave us the green light. So the three of us set out along the long gravel road that connected M's house to the others in the area. It was quiet, really quiet. After about 15 minutes of walking and goofing off, we saw someone ahead, a man walking toward us from the opposite direction. At first, we didn't think much of it, maybe just a neighbor, but something felt strange. He was wearing thick, heavy clothes like he was prepared for a snowstorm, even though it was warm outside, maybe around 60 degrees. We glanced at each other. Something didn't add up. As we passed him, it hit us. The smell. It was awful, so foul that it's hard to describe. Imagine something rotting in the sun. One of my friends nearly lost it and rushed into the woods gagging. That was the moment we decided to go back. We turned around. We hadn't walked more than 10 steps when we realized he was following us. He wasn't subtle about it either. Same slow pace, same horrible smell. He stayed just far enough back to keep us guessing, but close enough to make us nervous. We tried to stay calm and walked faster. So did he. We sped up again, now nearly jogging. He matched our pace, and then we ran. Sam looked back, let out a scream that still echoes in my mind, and that made Em and I turn around. The man was sprinting,
full speed, and it looked like he was holding something, maybe a sharp object. We couldn't really tell. That was it. We screamed and bolted down the road, running like our lives depended on it. After what felt like forever, we glanced back again. He had stopped, just stood there, staring, not moving, not speaking, just watching. We didn't stop. We ran the whole way back, slammed the door behind us, and locked it. M's parents were already asleep, so we decided not to wake them. Instead, we went to the living room and set up our sleeping bags, trying to calm ourselves down. Hours passed. Around 2 a.m., we were watching a horror movie. I sat on the couch near the big window that overlooked the cliff and ocean. The wind outside was soft, and you could hear the waves. I started to relax a bit. Then I heard footsteps right outside the window. I froze, told the others, and Em said it was probably the deer that usually came by. Apparently, she had been feeding the same deer for 2 years, and it sometimes came right up to the window. Excited, I looked outside, but I couldn't see anything, and it was too dark. I suggested going outside to try and feed it, but both Em and Sam said no. They reminded me of the guy earlier, and I agreed. We stayed inside. An hour later, we got tired and turned off the movie. Em and Sam fell asleep fast, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Around 3:30 a.m., I saw something move near the woods. Just a shadow at first. I grabbed a flashlight from the shelf and pointed it in the direction of the movement. That's when I saw him again, but this time he wasn't wearing the thick clothes. He wasn't wearing much at all. I panicked and shook Sam awake. Em wouldn't wake up no matter how hard we tried. I told Sam to look, but the man was gone. She thought I was messing with her and went back to sleep. I stayed on the couch, eyes wide open. Around 4:30 a.m., just as I was starting to doze off, there was a knock on the door. I nearly jumped. I told myself not to check, but curiosity won. I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. No one. Confused and scared, I went back to the couch, hid under the blanket, and eventually fell asleep. I woke up 30 minutes later, sweating and cold. My stomach turned. That smell was back, the same horrible, rotting stench. I sat up, and that's when I heard the footsteps inside. I grabbed the flashlight and turned it on. There he was, standing in the corner of the living room, the man from earlier. I screamed so loud that Em and Sam jumped up. They screamed too, and when they did, the man ran. We locked the doors and woke Em's parents. Her dad grabbed a weapon and went out to look for the man, and her mom called the police. The officers arrived, took our statements, and I went home later that day. My parents hugged me like they never wanted to let me go. After that, they banned me from going to any more sleepovers. Years later, I realized how close we came to something really dark. That man was found. Eventually, the police discovered he had been hiding out in an old shed near the property, and inside that shed, well, let's just say that awful smell had a reason. We were lucky, really lucky, and I still can't believe we made it out of that night.
I work in risk management at a big financial company in Manhattan. Over the years, I've met a lot of interesting people through my job. My coworkers and I would often head out for happy hour after work. It was a great way to unwind, share stories, and connect outside of the office. In 2019, a new guy named Sebastian transferred to our branch. I met him on his first day. He came off as very social, always smiling, laughing, and jumping into conversations like he'd known us for years. That first Friday, he joined us for drinks after work and instantly became the life of the party. He talked non-stop about his wild experiences, crazy adventures, and all the places he'd traveled. According to him, he'd dated models, partied with celebrities, and lived like a movie character. Honestly, it was entertaining at first. I enjoyed the energy. But the more time I spent with him, the more I realized not everything added up. Some of his stories were just too over the top. I began taking his tales with a grain of salt, but I still hung out with him. He was fun, and sometimes it's easier to just go with the flow. One day, Sebastian invited me and his sister to spend the weekend at their family's condo in St. Pete Beach, Florida. He said his mom, who was pretty well off, owned properties in multiple places. She'd be staying at the condo that weekend, but he said it would still be fun. I asked if I could bring my younger brother Tyler along, and Sebastian was totally cool with it. We all took the same flight at the airport. I met his sister for the first time. She had this quirky, hard-to-read vibe. Not bad, just unusual. When we got to the condo, I was surprised. It was really nice. 3 bedrooms? I'd never stayed in a condo that big before. Sebastian and his sister each took a room, so Tyler and I shared one. I joked with Tyler that if we met any girls, he'd be sleeping on the couch. Since we landed a bit late, we missed beach time, so instead we headed to some nearby beach bars. The crowd was a little older, but the vibe was good. At first, Sebastian, though, started drinking really fast. Shots, beers, more shots. He was going overboard, and his mood was shifting. He began acting aggressive, making weird comments, getting in people's faces. At one point, he was bothering random girls, drunkenly flirting in a way that made them visibly uncomfortable. Tyler and I were laughing nervously at first, but it quickly stopped being funny. It got embarrassing. Things nearly got heated when a bigger guy confronted Sebastian for bothering his date. I had to step in, pull Sebastian away, and apologize to diffuse the tension. Instead of thanking me, Sebastian shoved me and insulted me for not having his back. I told him to chill out. Even his sister was trying to calm him down. Out of nowhere, Sebastian stormed off, probably back to the condo. His sister followed without saying a word. Tyler and I stayed, finished our drinks, and ended up chatting with a couple of girls who had seen the whole thing. They joked about Sebastian's behavior, and we actually hit it off. They gave us their numbers and invited us to meet them later downtown. I texted Sebastian to see where he and his sister went. He replied quickly. They had gone back to the condo. So Tyler and I walked back, figuring he might still be upset. But the second we walked in, Sebastian jumped up off the couch with this overly cheerful smile, shouting, "Are we going out or what?" He was still obviously drunk, but suddenly acting like nothing had happened. I said we could hang out here for a bit first, then told him about the girls we met. When I said we got 2 numbers, his whole expression changed. Then Tyler, trying to be funny, mentioned that the girls had come up to us after Sebastian left and asked who he was. It was meant as a light jab, but it didn't land well. Sebastian immediately stormed off to his room and slammed the door. I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I whispered to his sister, "Is he always like this?" And she replied coldly, "Like what?" At that point, I just dropped it. We waited around for a bit, hoping he'd come out, but he didn't. So eventually, Tyler and I called an Uber and headed out to meet the girls downtown. While we were out, I started getting non-stop texts from Sebastian. "Where are you? How could you just leave me here? Your stuff is going outside. Don't come back." I showed Tyler and the girls. Everyone agreed something was really off, even though we were having a good time. We decided it was best to go back and make sure things didn't spiral out of control. When we got back, Sebastian was sitting alone on the couch, staring at the wall. I asked if he was okay. He looked at me, then looked away and muttered, "Hope you had fun," before heading to his room and shutting the door. Tyler and I stayed up talking for a while, trying to make sense of everything. Suddenly, we heard slow footsteps outside our door. We stopped talking. The steps came closer and stopped directly in front of our door. We both whispered to each other, realizing Sebastian was right outside. We didn't say another word. It was completely silent for about 5 minutes before we heard him walk away. Then, we heard him talking and laughing, but we didn't hear anyone else reply. Curious, I got up and slowly opened the door. I peeked into the dark living room. Sebastian was in the corner, leaning against the wall, head down, talking and laughing to himself. I heard him say, "Joe is always such a clown," then laugh again. "That's my name." I quietly shut the door and told Tyler what I saw. His response was, "What the heck?" We both agreed to leave first thing in the morning and find a hotel. Eventually, the talking and laughing stopped. We heard his door shut and finally tried to get some sleep, but maybe 20 minutes later, I woke up. something felt off. I sat up and saw Sebastian standing right in front of our door. I jumped and said, "Yo, what are you doing?" He suddenly lunged at me, yelling and trying to grab me. Tyler pulled him off and pushed him to the side of the room. Sebastian was shouting about how I betrayed him, how I ruined his weekend, and how I talked about him behind his back. There was no reasoning with him. We quickly packed our stuff and called a ride to a hotel. We stayed there until Sunday and flew back home. After that, I saw Sebastian at work a few times, but he never spoke to me again. Eventually, he transferred to another office. Maybe it was because of everything that happened. Sebastian seemed cool when I first met him, but that weekend made me realize some people hide their true selves very well. That trip was one of the most uncomfortable and surreal experiences I've ever had.
My family owns a peaceful vacation home in a small forest town called Glenridge. It sits on 2 acres, surrounded by tall trees and silence. We used to go there every year when I was younger, but now as adults, it's hard to match schedules. So one day in October, I told my girlfriend Lily about it during one of our dinner dates. The way the autumn leaves paint the hills in orange and red, it's like nature's version of a painting. She was instantly excited, so I invited her for a weekend getaway. 2 days later, we packed our bags and hit the road. The drive took 5 hours. We talked about random things, family, growing up, weird dreams, and when the conversations paused, we played our favorite comedy podcasts. Once we reached Glenridge, I gave her a quick tour of the village before pulling up to the house. There's a small wooden gate at the entrance. It's never locked, just there to make it look like no one's home. I opened it and we rolled in. My dad usually has a gardener keep the place neat, so the yard looked great. Lily loved it. We arrived just in time for lunch. I showed her around the house and turned on the hot tub so it'd be ready later. Then we went into town, grabbed some food, and even stopped by a small local museum. By the time we got back, it was already dark. The air was cold, but the hot tub on the back deck was warm and perfect. We sat there, relaxing under the stars, until we heard a soft crunching sound nearby. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a raccoon. We jumped out of the tub and rushed inside just in case. I turned off all the lights so we wouldn't attract attention and peeked out through the window. But instead of seeing an animal, I spotted a human figure walking around the side of the house. I rushed to the back door, locked it, and pulled the blinds down. Lily stayed quiet. The footsteps circled the house until they stopped at the front door. Then came a knock. A voice called out, "It's the police." I was caught off guard. I asked through the door, "Is there a problem?" He answered, "We got a report about suspicious activity here." That was strange. Our nearest neighbor is nearly half a mile away. There was a long pause. Then he added, "I need you to open the door, sir." I replied, "Sorry, I'm not comfortable doing that." Feeling uneasy, I peeked through the front window blinds. It was dusk, still light enough to see clearly, but there were no police cars anywhere near the house. I turned to Lily and whispered, "That's not a real cop." I told the man, "I don't see any car out front, so I don't feel safe opening the door." He didn't say anything after that. We sat silently for a few minutes until we heard heavy footsteps slowly walking away. He had been standing there the entire time, just feet from us, without us knowing. I looked out again, but saw nothing. He could have disappeared into the woods in any direction. That thought alone made us decide we weren't going outside again that night. The only time I stepped out was just to shut off the hot tub. After that, we stayed in the bedroom, watched a movie, and eventually fell asleep. For extra peace of mind, I had one of my dad's old hunting tools under the bed, just in case. The next day, we went hiking in the nearby nature reserve, grabbed lunch in town, and even saw a movie at the small local theater. But everything changed when we got back. As we pulled into the driveway, Lily suddenly screamed, "Oh my God!"
I slammed on the brakes, thinking something was in front of us. She pointed toward the woods, where a person was quickly walking away from our house and vanishing into the trees. Lily started panicking, saying someone was following us. I tried to calm her down, saying we were leaving in the morning and everything would be fine. But truth be told, I was nervous too. I parked the car right by the house so we wouldn't have to walk far. We rushed inside, locked everything, and started packing. We stayed in the bedroom for the rest of the night, but things weren't done yet. While we were lying down, I started hearing this strange scraping noise outside. It would go on for a few seconds, then stop, over and over. I sat up and waited. When the noise finally stopped, I got out of bed quietly so I wouldn't wake Lily. I tiptoed to the window and barely moved the blinds. And there he was, a man, staring directly into the window, into my eyes. I fell backwards and yelled. Lily shot up in bed, asking what happened. I didn't even answer. I grabbed the hunting tool from under the bed, ran outside, and made as much noise as possible, shouting into the woods, hoping to scare him off. After a few loud warning shots into the air, I ran back inside. We stayed up for a while, jumpy at every small sound, but eventually the night passed. In the morning, I called the local sheriff and filed a report. Since then, we've gone back to the house a few times, but we've never seen that man again, at least not while we were there.
I'm 20 now, but this story happened when I was 19 in a small town called Newark, Delaware. It's usually calm, except when college season kicks in. The University of Delaware brings a flood of students, parties, and chaos every fall and spring. At the time, I was working as a bicycle delivery guy at a sandwich place. I still work there. Actually, this all went down during one of my late-night shifts, probably around late April or early May. I can't remember the exact date. My shift was from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., and we were one of the only places still open during those hours, aside from the bars. So yeah, a lot of loud, hungry college kids. It got wild sometimes, but the tips were worth it. That night, just before I could end my shift, one final delivery popped up. I was tired and annoyed, but I had no choice. I grabbed the order and headed out. I knew the address well, no need for GPS. I pedaled fast and got there in under 10 minutes. I knocked loudly at the door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. It was frustrating. If no one came, I'd have to bring the food back. Total waste of time. I called the number on the receipt. No response. Just as I was about to call the store, I heard rustling noises coming from the bushes across the street. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I looked and froze. There was a person crouching behind the bushes in someone's yard. I couldn't see their face clearly, but they were definitely watching me. My heart was racing, but I pretended not to notice. I knocked again, harder this time. Still no one came. I started getting nervous. Was this a setup? I glanced back. That figure was still there, still watching me. I kept knocking, and finally someone opened the door. Annoyed and half asleep, I told him about the order, and he said he didn't place it. Must have been his roommate. Turns out the guy who actually ordered was passed out upstairs. How he knocked out that fast, I have no idea. The roommate went to wake him up. While I waited, I glanced back again. The person in the bushes had moved. Closer, still staring. I felt sick. I didn't want to go inside because I didn't want to leave my bike or be trapped, and who knew what that person was thinking? Luckily, the roommate came back quickly. He said the other guy wouldn't wake up. I asked if he could sign for the food instead. He hesitated, probably because there was no tip, but I insisted. He finally agreed and took the food. As soon as the door closed, I bolted back to my bike. But the second I kicked up the stand, I heard movement, fast movement. I looked up. That person had jumped out from the bushes and was running toward me. They wore dark clothes, a hoodie, and maybe a mask.
I couldn't see much, but I could tell their eyes were locked on me. It looked like they had something in their hand, something sharp. I didn't wait to confirm. I turned hard and pedaled with everything I had. All the nearby streets led to dead ends. My only option was the unlit bike trail nearby. I didn't have a light, but I knew that path like the back of my hand. I rode through the dark, listening for any sounds behind me, jumping at every rustle, but somehow I didn't see him again. I made it back to the store, breathless and shaking. I didn't tell my boss, I didn't call the police, I hadn't seen enough to describe the person. I just clocked out, threw my bike in the trunk, and drove home. I made it safely. I never saw that person again. I don't know what they wanted, but whatever it was, I'm glad I didn't stick around to find out. Since then, I've never worked a late shift again without carrying something to protect myself. That night taught me one thing. It doesn't matter how quiet or safe a place seems. Anything can happen, anywhere, to anyone.
I'm 29, and on weekends I escape the busy city life to stay at my small house in a quiet town in Michigan. It's a peaceful rural area, exactly the kind of place you'd expect to be relaxing. But honestly, the way my property is set up, it looks like the opening scene of a creepy movie. A lonely house with no neighbors in sight and nothing but silence around. I like it that way. I don't come here for company, I come to be alone, to rest and disconnect from my stressful job and the noise of everyday life. This place is my personal getaway. One Friday evening, just after I arrived, someone knocked on the door. It was a man holding a clipboard. Right away, I figured he was selling something. He asked if I was happy with my security system. I told him I didn't have one, but wasn't really interested either. I even joked that no one would want to break into my ugly house anyway. He didn't laugh. Instead, he launched into a whole speech about recent break-ins in the area, news I hadn't heard anything about. Then he asked who lived with me. I said I lived alone, which now I regret admitting. Still, he kept trying to sell. He even offered to remove the installation fee if I signed up right away. I ended up giving him my phone number just to move things along. He thanked me and left. Later that night, I was on the couch watching episodes of Yellowstone, just zoning out. Around 11 p.m., I heard another knock on the door. Let me be clear, nobody in this area knocks that late unless something is really wrong. I didn't get up. I figured if it was something important, they'd say so, but the knocking continued. Eventually, I got up and called out, asking who was there. No answer. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out again, saying I wasn't interested and that I had protection inside, though that wasn't exactly true. I hoped it would scare them off. The knocking finally stopped, but then my phone rang. The caller ID, it said 911 Emergency Services. That alone made my stomach drop. I didn't even think 911 could call you directly like that. I picked up. A man on the line asked, "Is this George?" I said yes. Then he claimed he was with the local police and that officers were outside my house because of a reported incident on the block. He said they had some questions for me. I asked him to have the officer step in front of a window so I could confirm it was really them. He refused, and that didn't make any sense. I told him I wasn't opening the door and ended the call. Something felt off. Even if it had been real, I had no legal reason to open the door to strangers in the middle of the night. He called again. I ignored it. Then I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. To be sure, I called 911 myself. The woman on the line told me right away that was not real. There were no officers at my house. She told me to lock everything and stay inside. I grabbed something heavy to protect myself just in case. While still on the phone, I heard the back doorknob rattling. Someone was trying to open it. Then loud bangs like someone was slamming into it. I told the 911 operator and she said help was on the way and would be there in under 10 minutes, but I didn't feel safe waiting. I yelled through the door, warning them that I wasn't alone and that I had backup. Then a voice shouted, "It's the police, open up." Right after, another loud slam hit the door. The back door has a window beside it, so I peeked through. That's when I saw two people wearing disturbing-looking masks, like sacks with eye and mouth holes. They saw me. They saw I was on the phone, and just like that, they ran off into the night. 5 minutes later, real officers knocked on the door. I let them in,
One of them checked the house and even walked around the entire property. They stayed outside for a while with their car lights flashing. It made me feel a little safer knowing they were there. After they left, I noticed one patrol car remained out front for a couple of hours. I think they wanted to make sure no one returned. The next day, I spoke to my neighbors. No one else had been visited by that salesman, just me. Now I'm pretty sure that guy wasn't selling anything. He was probably looking for a house that seemed easy to get into, and when he found mine, he came back with others later, pretending to be emergency services to trick me into opening the door. It didn't work, but from now on, I'm never opening the door to someone I don't know. Not ever again.
When things got tense with my parents, I had to leave, and I didn't have a steady place to stay, just moving between friends' couches. One day, while browsing roommate apps, I found a listing from someone named Luke. He had a room available in a one-story house for $1,200 a month. He mentioned he'd be gone most of the time, so the renter would often have the house to themselves. But there were some strict rules in the listing. No parties, no large groups, no drinking in the living room, and absolutely no going into the basement. Still, it didn't sound that bad. I went to see the place. Luke opened the door, and right away, something felt a bit off. He was quiet, seemed shy, and looked kind of uncomfortable the whole time. But the room was big, and the house had an open layout. For the price, it was a great deal. He repeated the rules in person, especially the part about not going into the attic or the basement. I agreed and moved in 2 days later. There was no formal lease. I just paid him in cash at the start of each month. My room was already furnished, so I settled in quickly. He even gave me a key so I could lock my room. At first, I thought it was a kind gesture. Luke never told me what he did for a living. He said he wouldn't be home often, but his car was always in the driveway. At night, I'd hear footsteps and doors opening and closing, way more than you'd expect in a quiet house. One night, I got up to use the bathroom and noticed the basement door was open. A dim light was coming from downstairs, and I heard strange banging sounds from deep inside. Suddenly, Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me with a serious expression. I apologized and said I was just heading to the bathroom. He told me to shut the door. The next day, I came home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it when I left. Inside, my things had clearly been moved around. Clothes in the dresser were messy, and my closet door was cracked open. That's when I realized Luke had his own key and had been in my room. I went to knock on his door, but he didn't answer, even though his car was right outside. Later that night, I finally saw him leaving his room and decided to ask. I confronted him calmly, but he denied everything. He claimed I was the only one with a key and then quickly left. I was already searching for a new place, but curiosity got to me. Luke wasn't home and his car was gone, so I decided to check the basement. I grabbed my phone for light and headed down. The basement was small, with a tan carpet and a strange smell that got stronger near a locked door in the corner. I didn't try too hard to open it. Honestly, I was too creeped out. I noticed some old boxes and an ugly couch, but nothing unusual otherwise. That night, I tried to sleep, but woke up to the sound of floorboards creaking. When I turned over, Luke was leaning over my bed. I froze. I asked him how he got into my locked room. He asked if I went into the basement. I said no. He didn't answer my questions, just turned around and said, "I think you should find somewhere else to stay." After he left the room, I packed immediately. I knocked on his door and demanded half my rent back. He opened the door just enough to hand me a stack of bills. $400. Not quite half, but I took it. I left within the hour and slept in my car that night. The next day, I went back to my parents' house. After hearing everything, they welcomed me back. A month later, I moved again, but this time I was more cautious. If you're ever moving in with a stranger from the internet, please trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is.
It happened during my 3rd year in college, when I finally moved off campus into a student apartment. The university matched me with a roommate, someone else looking for housing. His name was David. At first, everything seemed normal. David was friendly, polite, always smiling and eager to talk. But soon, I started noticing odd things about him. Not dangerous, just off. He would spend too much time in my room, asking strange personal questions, even poking around my stuff like he had every right to. I told myself he was just overly friendly, maybe a bit nosy. But the feeling that something wasn't quite right kept growing. Late at night, I'd hear sounds from his room. Not loud music or a movie, but whispers, soft steps, and shuffling around. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he was talking on the phone. Still, something felt off. One night, I couldn't sleep because of the whispers. I crept quietly to his door and leaned in to listen. It was definitely his voice, whispering to himself. Then suddenly, silence. And then I heard it. My name. He whispered it. Jeff. Did he know I was there? I rushed back to my bed, heart racing. Maybe he was talking in his sleep. Maybe he saw my shadow. But how did he know I was standing outside his room? The days passed, and the strange behavior continued. The noises, the whispers, the weird looks he gave me during the day. Then, another night, I heard him right outside my door, whispering again. I put my ear to the door. Just like before, the whispers stopped, and again, he said my name, Jeff. This time, I answered, trying to act normal. Yeah? You okay? But he didn't say a word, just walked away. Things were getting way too weird. Then, one night, I woke up and noticed my door was closing. I heard footsteps walking back down the hallway. I was sure it was David. That was the last straw. The next morning, I asked him directly. I told him I'd been hearing him moving around at night, even entering my room. I asked if he had a sleepwalking problem. He hesitated, then said yes, he sometimes walked in his sleep. But I didn't believe him. Something felt wrong, and I needed answers. So when he left one afternoon, I went into his room. I know it was risky, but I needed to understand what was going on. I searched quickly, knowing I didn't have much time. And just when I was about to give up, I found a small drawer tucked away in the back of his closet. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, of me, asleep. Some were close-ups of my face, others were taken from different angles, clearly taken while I had no idea. There was also another guy in a few of them, someone my age, probably David's previous roommate. I felt sick. He had been secretly photographing me in my sleep. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew I needed to get out. I took pictures of the drawer and grabbed a few of the photos for proof. The next day, I went straight to the student housing office. They acted quickly. I was moved to another apartment, this time with a normal, easygoing roommate. I never saw David again. Even now, years later, I still remember those photos and his whispering voice in the dark. And the other guy in those pictures? I never found out whom he was. Maybe he figured it out too.
When I was 23, I moved to another state for a job. I still work for the same company, but now I'm back in my hometown at the local office. Back then, I needed a place to stay that didn't cost a fortune, so I posted on every site you can think of: Facebook, Craigslist, even Reddit, looking for a roommate. That's how I met Rob. He messaged me on Facebook saying he had a room available. I checked his profile to see if he looked like a normal person, and he did. We even FaceTimed. He gave me a virtual tour of the house, nothing fancy, but close to my new job, and honestly, he seemed all right. The rent was fair, the house looked decent, and he seemed pretty relaxed about everything. A week later, I packed my things and moved in. He greeted me outside, gave me a key, and helped with my bags. One thing I noticed, he was really short, like the same height as me. The room was already furnished. He said a friend had just moved out. I replaced the bedding with my own and spent the rest of the day settling in. Rob seemed like he wanted to be friendly, which was fine. Nothing too weird. Yet. The next day was Sunday. Rob offered to show me around the area. I didn't really want to, but I said okay to be polite. He showed me shops, restaurants, all that. Then he offered to grab lunch, but I wasn't hungry. Right after that, he suggested going for drinks. Again, I politely said no. I don't usually go out on work nights. He kept pushing, but I stayed firm. Suddenly, he went really quiet, like something upset him. It was awkward, but I tried to brush it off. That week, I started my new job, so I didn't think too much about it. A few days later, I was doing laundry and noticed something strange. My clothes in the hamper looked moved. I couldn't explain it. Then I realized a pair of my underwear was missing. I searched my whole room 5 times, and it was just gone. I had a sinking feeling, but I wasn't ready to believe anything bad yet. Still, I started wishing the bedroom had a lock. So that weekend, I bought a new lockable doorknob and installed it while Rob wasn't home. I felt a lot better after that. I figured I'd tell him the next time I saw him. That night, though, I woke up to loud banging on my door. It was Rob, saying my name. He didn't sound happy. I checked the time, around 1:30 in the morning. I just stayed quiet and pretended to be asleep. I had a feeling it was about the new doorknob. The next morning, Rob texted me saying we needed to talk. I replied, asking if it was about the lock, and he said yes. I apologized and explained I just felt safer with a lock, being a woman living with someone I didn't know well. He responded a bit nicer this time, but still said I had to take it off. I was confused and a little shaken. How did he even know I changed it? I hadn't left the old one lying around. That meant he must have tried to open my door. The next day, I put the old doorknob back. But then things got worse. One afternoon, a girl showed up at the door while Rob was out. She asked if I lived there, then told me to get out immediately. She said Rob had a history. Multiple girls had issues with him, and he wasn't safe to be around. I asked how she knew I was here. She said she saw me moving in and waited for the right time to warn me. I thanked her and took her number. I was seriously scared now. I started packing and found a studio apartment across town, more expensive but available right away. I texted Rob and told him I had to leave because of a family emergency. He didn't reply at first. When he came home, he asked about the message. I gave him my best excuse, and he said he'd give me my money back the next day after going to the bank. But later that night, he knocked on my door again and asked, "Did some girl say something to you?" I acted confused and said no. He looked suspicious, but let it go. Then things took a dark turn. That night, I woke up and saw a shadow sitting at the end of my bed. It was Rob. I froze. He reached out and told me to stay quiet. I begged him not to hurt me, and he said, "Why would I do that?" He kept talking about the girl who warned me and said not to believe her. I told him he was scaring me, and then he touched my leg, saying he didn't mean to scare me. That was it. I jumped out of bed and ran. He shouted at me to stop, but I didn't look back. I ran outside, hid in the bushes, and called the police. They arrived fast. I explained everything, and they spoke to Rob and then let me go inside to get the rest of my stuff. I asked for my money back while they were there, and surprisingly, he actually paid me. One of the officers quietly told me that this guy had been involved in problems before, but nothing had stuck. Rob denied everything. It was just my word against his. I left and spent the night in a hotel. The next day, I moved into my new apartment. The girl who posted it helped me move in quickly.
Since then, I've made a promise to myself. I'll never live with someone I don't really know ever again.
I've always loved hiking. A few years back, I took a long road trip across the country after going through a rough breakup. One of the places I was most excited to visit was Utah. The mountains and forests there seemed like the perfect escape. I chose a quiet, lesser-known spot in the Wasatch National Forest. I like hiking in solitude. Busy trails just aren't my thing. I drove down a narrow access road, parked at the edge of the woods, and stepped out to begin the hike. I had no phone service, which was honestly how I liked it. I noted my location and started walking. Yeah, I know hiking alone off-trail can be risky, but I enjoy exploring without being tied to a fixed route. I always download an offline map beforehand. GPS still works without service after all. But no, I didn't get lost. What happened was something else entirely. My destination was a lookout point about 3 or 4 miles up. The terrain was tough and I wasn't making fast progress. An hour in, light rain began to fall. I can't stand hiking in the rain, so I turned around planning to call it a day. When I finally saw my car again, I felt relief, but that feeling vanished fast. All 4 of my tires were flat, slashed, no doubt in my mind. This wasn't an accident. Panic crept in. I scanned the woods but saw nothing. I listened, but all I heard was rain on the leaves. I was deep in the forest with no service and no way to call for help. I knew I had to get to higher ground to try and find a signal. That meant heading back up the mountain. Halfway up the trail again, I heard a rustling sound behind me. It stopped when I stopped. It moved when I moved. I didn't want to look, so I just walked faster. The sun was going down, the forest looked darker by the minute, and the rain hadn't let up. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, but it felt like someone was out there. Finally, I reached the summit. By some luck, I had service. I didn't waste a second, and I called for help and explained what was going on. I mentioned the tires and that I felt like I was being followed. The operator said help was on the way, but I still had a problem. I had to get back to my car through the same woods. I couldn't go straight back the way I came. That seemed like a bad idea. So I tried to circle around, entering the forest from a new angle. For a while, things seemed fine. No odd sounds, no signs of anyone. But then I heard it again, a snap from the left. Then minutes later, another sound behind me. It hit me. I wasn't being followed by one person. There were multiple. I picked up the pace now, jogging. That's when I saw something that made it all worse. A hidden campsite deep in the trees. It looked recent, a bunch of logs around a fire pit like people had been meeting there. I didn't stop to check, I just ran past it. Then I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a foot pulling back behind a tree. That was it. I broke into a full sprint. I didn't care how loud I was, I just needed to get out. The sounds behind me got louder. I knew I was being chased. I looked back once. There were 6 people, all dressed in white, running after me. I ran like my life depended on it. My legs were on fire. I could barely breathe, but I kept going. Finally, I saw my car and a police officer standing nearby. I reached him, barely able to speak. He said he had already called for roadside assistance. I was beyond relieved. I gave him a full report. Then he told me something that chilled me to the bone. He said that part of Utah has a history of hidden groups living off the grid, some with strong beliefs or practices. He thought I had probably wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. I still think about that day. What if I hadn't turned around when I did? What if I hadn't found that signal up there? I don't know who those people were or what they wanted, but I do know one thing. I'll never hike alone in a remote forest again.
I've been hiking for years now. Not professionally or anything, but I've explored most of the big trails across the country, and I've visited over 75% of the national parks here. After a while, regular trails stopped exciting me, so I started doing something new. I'd go on Google Maps, find forests that didn't have official names or trails, and just explore.
I know it's not the smartest idea, but the mystery made it fun, and I always made sure not to get lost. I carried a bunch of little stickers I made myself, and I'd stick them to trees along the way. As I walked back, I'd pull them off one by one. That way, I never left a trace behind. It worked great, until one day, it didn't. This time, I chose a forest in Connecticut. It used to be a town a long time ago, but now it's completely empty. No one lives there, and technically, no one's allowed in. But that usually means no crowds, which is exactly what I like. I started hiking around noon. Right away, I noticed something strange. It was silent. Not just quiet. I mean, no birds, no bugs, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing. I've been in quiet forests before, but this was different. I kept walking, putting stickers as usual, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling. Usually I see signs of life eventually, a squirrel, a bird, something. But here, nothing. After a while, I was actually hoping to bump into someone. That's how strange it felt. Eventually, though, I started to relax, until I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It was like a moan, long and broken. The kind of sound you imagine when something's in pain. It didn't sound like wind. There wasn't even wind that day. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, but deep down, I knew better. Still, I walked away from it, and the sound faded. I should have left then, but I didn't. As I walked, I started thinking, how would an animal even get hurt way out here? Was someone hunting in the forest? I hadn't heard any loud noises. Could someone have done something out here and left it like that? That's when I saw something on a tree in front of me. Carvings. Weird symbols, not letters, not patterns. I looked around, and a few other trees had the same thing. That was enough for me. I turned around and headed back, pulling my stickers as I went. No more exploring. I just wanted to leave. Then I noticed something that didn't make sense. There was a cave up ahead, almost like a bear den, but I knew I hadn't seen it earlier. Even worse, my stickers. They were lower than they should have been. They should have been shoulder height, but now they were closer to my waist. That's when it hit me. Someone had moved them. Someone had been following me, and they were trying to lead me into that cave. I turned and ran. I didn't look back for long, just quick glances over my shoulder. I didn't have time to think about who or why. I just knew I had to get out. The forest was still silent, except for my footsteps. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and checked my phone. By some luck, I had one bar. I opened the map, found where I parked, and figured out the direction I needed to go. Then I lost signal again. Didn't matter, I had what I needed. That's when the sound came back. The same moaning, but now louder and closer. I ran faster than I ever have. I could hear it behind me, but I never saw anything. After what felt like forever, I saw the edge of the woods. The moment I stepped out, the sound stopped. I got in my car and drove off as fast as I could. That day changed how I see hiking. Here's the best explanation I've come up with. Maybe someone lives out there off the grid. They noticed me, followed me, and messed with my trail markers. Maybe the sound was from some kind of tool they used, like a whistle or a speaker. Maybe they were just trying to scare me. And it worked. I don't have all the answers, but I do understand now why that forest is closed to the public.
Back when I was a teenager, my house was the go-to hangout spot for my group of friends. There were a few reasons for that. My dad had a cool basement set up with a pool table and speakers. He usually left us alone down there, and we had space to relax without interruptions. The house sat on a big piece of land and backed up to a patch of woods. If you followed a trail through the trees, you'd reach a quiet dirt road. Across that road was a huge reservoir. It was my favorite place in the world. I used to sneak through breaks in the fence to get there. It wasn't technically allowed, but nobody really stopped us. That place was my escape. I went there to think, swim, or just be alone. Even now, it's one of the few parts of that time I still miss. One evening, my friends and I were in the basement playing pool. Music was blasting, and we were already getting a little bored. Then Chester suggested we head out for a walk through the woods to the reservoir. It was still light outside, so we thought it'd be a good time. There were 5 of us: me, Chester, Rick, Jasper, and Hassan. I think Rick and Hassan grabbed a few drinks for the walk. We weren't planning anything wild, just a quick trip to the water. It had rained earlier, so the ground was soft, but we didn't care. We headed for a rocky cliff on the near side of the reservoir where we usually sat. After a while, we decided to walk to the far side. That meant following the edge of the reservoir to a spot where we could cut across. The far side had this smooth patch we always called the beach. About 20 minutes later, we made it to that side. That's when things started feeling strange. Hassan suddenly stopped and pointed into the distance. Something was moving along the same side we were on. It was far down the path, but we could see it getting closer to the water. At first, we were curious. Encounters like this were rare, so we stayed quiet and watched. The figure slowly came out of the woods, dragging something behind them. As they got closer to the shore, we realized they were pulling a large black bag. It looked heavy, and the person seemed to struggle with it. We all fell silent. None of us smiled anymore. The person knelt beside the bag at the edge of the water. We couldn't tell what they were doing from so far away. We figured it was time to leave quietly while they were distracted. But just as we turned to go, Chester noticed something else. 3 more figures appeared from the woods. 2 of them were dragging bags too. The third had a kayak over his head. That's when I felt my stomach drop. It didn't feel random. It felt like something serious was going on. The first person got into the kayak and the others helped him place a bag in it. He paddled out into the reservoir, then the bag disappeared into the water. He returned to shore and did it again, twice more, and then, just like in a movie, my phone rang. The ringtone cut through the quiet like a knife. I panicked and fumbled to silence it. The figures all froze and turned toward us. That's when we ran. We bolted along the path, across the edge of the water and back into the woods. Rick looked back and shouted that they were chasing us. I've never run so fast in my life. Running through trees and brush is tough. Add fear and adrenaline, and it becomes a nightmare. I reached the fence first, the one with the hole we always used to sneak in, but now, in a panic, I couldn't find the opening. My friends caught up and saw me scrambling along the fence. They started yelling, then Rick pointed. The hole was just ahead. We pushed through it fast. As I helped Chester, I heard a branch snap nearby. They were close. We didn't stop. We kept running all the way through the woods and into my backyard. Finally, we were safe. Hassan called the police. We told them everything we saw. They said they'd send someone over. I knew we'd probably get in trouble for being where we weren't supposed to, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. When the police arrived, we explained what happened. They searched the area, and what they found made my stomach turn. Muddy footprints led from the trail to the edge of our backyard. I told the officers those weren't ours. I was sure of it. There was no reason I'd climb my own fence. They didn't find anyone on our property, but they said they'd keep checking around the reservoir. A few days later, they pulled out 3 large bags from the water. It became a huge local story. My family and I were shaken for weeks. My mom thought she saw people in the woods near our house. One night, she swore she saw a flash of light like someone was taking pictures. That whole experience was one of the main reasons we moved out. We didn't feel safe anymore. To this day, the police never found out who those people were. No names, no arrests, no answers. I'm sharing this now because I saw a recent article about someone drowning at the reservoir. It brought everything back. That place still gives me chills. I can't help but wonder what other secrets are hidden beneath that quiet water.
I once had a night job caring for a 65-year-old woman named Martha, who had a cognitive condition. Her daughter, Colleen, worked overnight shifts and needed someone experienced to stay with her mother. I agreed to help for just one night, and honestly, that was more than enough. I had worked with people in similar situations before, but this night was different. When I arrived, Colleen introduced me to Martha. She smiled politely before going upstairs to her room. Colleen told me her mom sometimes wandered around at night and might get confused, but it wasn't sleepwalking. It was part of her condition. I reassured her that I could manage. After Colleen left, I sat in the living room catching up on a show. Around 9 p.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. I called out to Martha, but there was no reply. Then, I heard her door shut. I figured she went to the bathroom and thought nothing of it. An hour later, I got up to grab a sandwich. As I walked back into the living room with my plate, I nearly dropped everything. Martha was standing silently in the doorway. The plate shattered, and startled, I apologized and asked if she was okay, but she began shouting, asking who I was. I reminded her gently that I was the care worker her daughter hired. She kept yelling, saying she didn't know me. Eventually, I managed to calm her down enough to guide her back upstairs. I gave her a glass of water and some melatonin Colleen had left. She took them and lay down. I really thought that was the end of it. I was exhausted and decided to rest in the guest room upstairs like Colleen had suggested. I fell asleep quickly, but maybe an hour later, I woke up to a repetitive banging sound from downstairs. I rushed out of bed and headed to the kitchen. In the dark, I saw a silhouette. It was Martha. She was repeatedly opening and slamming the oven door. It was surreal, like something from a creepy film. I called her name loudly. She stopped, turned her head slowly, shut the oven one last time, and started walking toward me. I asked if she was okay, but she didn't say anything. Her face was blank, like she wasn't really present. She walked right past me and went back upstairs, slamming her bedroom door. I followed her, knocked, and peeked inside. She was standing by her bed, facing the wall, completely still. I helped her lie down again and wished her a good night. Back in the guest room, I tried staying awake just in case, but eventually I dozed off. Sometime later, I woke up again. My alarm hadn't gone off, but I felt something was wrong. That's when I noticed the closet door slightly open, and the shadow of a head peeking out. My heart dropped. I whispered, "Martha?" No answer. I repeated her name slowly. The door opened and she stepped out saying again, "Who are you? I don't know you." Like earlier, she walked toward me. I tried turning on the lamp, and when the light came on, I saw she was holding a large kitchen knife. At that moment, everything changed. I knew I couldn't calm her down like before. I shouted for her to drop it. Instead, she shouted back and kept repeating the same words. I realized I had to get out. I mapped a way to dodge around her, jumped off the far side of the bed, and dashed past. She swung the knife, but it was slow and didn't connect. Still, it was terrifying. I ran downstairs, grabbed my shoes, and went outside. Instead of calling emergency services, I followed Colleen's instructions and called her directly. She yelled at me not to leave her mom alone, and I shouted back trying to explain. I stayed outside until Colleen got home. When she went inside, Martha was back in bed, sound asleep. Colleen accused me of overreacting until she found the knife next to her mom's bed. I didn't even tell her I had tried to sleep, and she had offered that guest room herself. But that was the first and last time I ever worked in that house. In all my years in this field, nothing came close to that night. Martha wasn't dangerous on purpose, but she was the most unpredictable client I'd ever cared for.
I was 15 when this happened, working part-time at a small amusement park in upstate New York. It was October, the air already carrying that sharp bite that hints winter is near. The park was winding down for the season, just a few days left before it shut its gates until spring. I didn't think anything of that Sunday when I arrived. I checked in, grabbed my uniform, and headed to my usual station, expecting a slow, uneventful shift. But that day didn't stay ordinary for long. I spent about 5 hours on duty, mostly guiding families toward attractions and cleaning up scattered trash. It was almost 5 in the evening, and the sun had already dipped low behind the treetops, casting long shadows across the empty walkways. I looked at my watch. Just 5 more minutes before I could clock out. My legs were tired, my back ached, and I was more than ready to go home. That's when I noticed someone walking toward me from across the midway. He didn't exactly blend in. His clothes were off, a thin gray t-shirt that looked 2 sizes too big, stained in a few places, and a pair of black sweatpants that were ripped near the knees. His beard was uneven, his hair messy, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he was being followed. I straightened up a little, trying to stay polite. Maybe he was just lost, or maybe he was looking for someone. I asked, "Can I help you?" keeping my voice steady. He didn't answer right away, just stared, blinking, slowly shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Then he looked past me again, like he heard something behind him. The silence dragged on until I repeated myself, this time with a little more firmness. He finally responded, barely above a whisper. Where are the bathrooms?" His voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it, like he was trying not to be heard by something nearby. I forced a smile and pointed up the hill. "Just around that bend, to the right," I said, trying to sound upbeat. He nodded slowly, then turned and walked in that direction. But as he did, he kept glancing over his shoulder, not at the trees, not at the path, at me. I turned away quickly, pretending to organize some things on my cart. A few minutes later, my coworker came to relieve me. I practically flew through the park to the back building, eager to clock out. After signing out, I changed out of my uniform and headed to the employee parking area to wait for Jordan. He was 17 and usually gave me rides home. I sat on the wooden bench near the back gate, shivering a little from the wind, watching the sky turn a deeper gray. After what felt like forever, Jordan's car finally pulled up. I jumped in, relieved, and we decided to grab some food before heading home. There was a local diner we liked. Greasy burgers, salty fries, the works. It was comforting, but halfway through our meal, I felt that same eerie tug in my chest. I looked up and saw him, that same man, the one from the park. He was sitting at a table a few rows away, just watching me, not eating, not drinking, just staring, unblinking. I leaned toward Jordan, trying not to panic. "That guy from the park, he's here," I whispered. Jordan turned to look, then shrugged. "Probably just a weird coincidence," he said. "Don't stress it, Ben. He probably lives nearby." I tried to nod like I believed him, but I didn't. My stomach was in knots. We paid the bill and left quickly, climbing back into Jordan's car for the 35-minute drive home. I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror. It felt like something was wrong, but I couldn't explain it. Then, at the very first red light, I froze. To our right, in the lane beside us, was a white Honda. The same man was in the driver's seat, staring at me again. No phone, no music, just him and those empty eyes. "Jordan, he's here again," I whispered. Jordan turned to look, and this time he didn't shrug. He tensed up a little, gripping the wheel a little tighter. We drove around our neighborhood a few times, taking different turns just to be sure we weren't being followed. Eventually, convinced the car was gone, Jordan dropped me off at my place. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My mom and sister were out shopping. My dad was out of town for work. I was the only one home. I locked the door behind me, tossed my bag down, and headed straight for my room. I didn't even change out of my clothes. I just wanted to get under the covers and try to forget how weird the day had been. I was almost asleep when I heard something outside my window, a soft scraping noise like fingertips brushing glass. I sat up slowly, my heart racing. The room was dark except for the glow from the street lamp outside. I walked toward the window, pulling back the curtain just an inch, and there he was, standing in the middle of my front yard, just below my window, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly, smiling, not moving, but just staring, unblinking. I leaned toward Jordan, grabbing my phone, and called for help. I stayed low, away from the window, until I saw the flashing lights pull up minutes later. But by the time they checked the yard, the street, and the block, he was gone, vanished.
I never saw him again. After that night, I quit the amusement park as soon as the season ended. I still don't know who he was or why he followed me. But every October, when the air turns cold and the leaves start to fall, I can't help but check the windows, just in case. Because some faces, even the silent ones, are impossible to forget.